folks to pile in, but you can go ahead and hold us in the light, hold Joyce, Lindsey in the light as we prepare for today, and hopefully um, have a chance for some ministry and uh, yeah, spoken ministry. All right. Well, welcome, friends, and everyone who's joining us today, be you Quaker or not. I'm really excited to be bringing in Lindsey Fielder Cook and Joyce Ajlouny into our Quaker Earthcare Witness space today to talk about the intersections of Earthcare and peacemaking. I'll say a brief few words about Quaker Earthcare Witness. We're a international environmental Quaker network, probably I think the only Quaker organization, nonprofit, whose core focus is Earthcare, whose central focus is Earthcare. We work closely with both Lindsey's organization, Quaker United Nations Office, as well as other organizations from Earthquaker Action Team in Philadelphia to SCNL in Washington to really push forward the cause of Earth Care amongst friends. You can learn more about us at quakerearthcare.org. And I'm sure Mish can drop that in the chat. But today's chat that we're going to be getting into really focuses on a shift that's been happening in our world in the last 2 years. If you follow the news or if you follow the data, there's been a massive uptick in violence around the world. Um, just to put that in perspective, it's really been a shift from of almost a doubling of amount of war-related deaths since 2021, and that shift, obviously there's the Ukraine war, there's also the recent genocide in Gaza, but there's also a number of other shifts from the Tigray region. And what's happening in Myanmar, a whole bunch of other places around the world. And so we think it's a really important time. Quaker Earthcare Witness has been holding this concern closely, and it came up strongly enough that we decided to put some words to this in our annual report and made our this last few months, we've been soliciting articles from Quakers around the world about this intersection between Earth Care and peacemaking. And so I'll read you an excerpt of what we wrote for our annual report, and then we'll dive into questions here with Joyce and Lindsey. But it really came out of an old Quaker Earthcare Witness saying when we were first advocating for Earthcare issues among FCNL. We used to say that there can be no peace on Earth without peace with Earth. We used to say that. And I'll go ahead and just post what we wrote recently in the chat for folks to read, and then I'll read that out loud, and we can all sit with that. So this is from our most recent annual report. As we witness the escalation of warfare around the world, QEW has been called to deepen its engagement and ministry regarding the intersections of Earthcare and global peacemaking. We strongly believe that there can be no peace on Earth without peace with Earth, and conversely, that there can be no peace with Earth without peace on Earth. The two are inseparable. We must tame and transmute the flame of human conflict and ecocide if we are to bring about a life-giving future for our species and the web of life. Such a transformation will require unprecedented global cooperation and solidarity, and warfare is the antithesis of such unity. We are now, as a species, too powerful to remain in rivalry with ourselves. To achieve a genuine world beyond war, we will need to address the root causes of war, eliciting campaigns for global healing, reconciliation, and transformative justice that redress our deepest wounds and the systems that perpetuate them. Only through this profound change within and amongst ourselves can we become, on net, a regenerative species within the web of life. So with that said, I want to turn out to our two speakers today. Joyce and Lindsey are two old friends, and they met each other many years ago, all the way back in 1987 during the first Intifada at Ramallah Friends School, where Joyce was a student. Oh, nope, not at the time, sorry. Growing up, I thought you were a student,
Yes.
but then was a teacher. They were both teachers at that time. Sorry, that was a misframed. but but Joyce and Lindsey were both teachers during the first Intifada in 1987, and they connected with each other there and have grown. Joyce obviously is now the General Secretary of AFSC, and Lindsey is the lead representative of Quaker United Nations office with regards to climate change and environmental issues. And so with all of what we've just discussed, I want to turn to the very human level out to both of you. I'm wondering if you can share with us both how you first met and what was your first meeting, and how did it evolve? What were some stories that came out of that first couple of years together?
Do you want to go first, Lindsey, or do you want me to go first?
You go first, Joyce.
Okay, well, I'll start with saying what time it was the year where I came back from studying in the United States. And obviously I'm a third generation Quaker, for those who don't know on the call. I was brought up in a Quaker family in Ramallah. I was born in Jerusalem, raised in Ramallah. And I attended college in the United States in Michigan. And upon my return in 1987, my degree was in computer science. And I thought, the principal of the Ramallah Friends School, the girls' school then, approached me and said, we need a teacher because we got a donation of 3 computers, the first computers ever to arrive on the school premises. And how about you teach computer science? And I had a minor in math and whatnot. And so they attached to me a lot of math classes. And I'm like, okay, I could teach. Let me try teaching. And so that's what got me back into the Ramallah Friends School. And you're right, Keith, this is my alma mater. I spent first grade through 12th grade there, graduated from the school, and so did my families, and my husband, my mother, my grandmother in the 1920s. So we have a long history with the with the Ramallah Friends School, and so that's what brought me to the school then, is to teach. And I was coming back from the United States thinking, here I am, a Palestinian American, entrenched in some Western ideas and all of that, and coming back to what is a more a conservative society, if you want. And so I met those American teachers who were coming in to teach at the Ramallah Friends School, and I just gravitated towards them because I wanted folks who sort of shared some of my a more liberal, open take on life, and it gave me a little taste of what I left in the United States after 4 years of college, and Lindsey was one of those teachers, and I think that's the first connection is meet. I don't remember like our first encounter, Lindsey, but I'm thinking that it must have been at the school, and that was 1987, I think, in the fall of 1987. And as you know, the first Intifada started in December of that year. So we got to start the school year for a few months, and then the Intifada started, and Israel closed all the schools, and then we can talk a little bit more about that. But that's sort of I want to give Lindsey a chance to comment on that, because I hope I got it all right, Lindsey. But this is the scene and the time.
Yes, so 1987, as Joyce said, the Intifada hadn't happened. It was coming in about 2 or 3 months after arrival. And I had left the States to study in the UK, study politics, and I'm not a third generation Quaker. I'm a convinced Quaker, I guess is what you call it. I'd come across Quakers at Durham University, and then I went back and I got an internship with CUNO in New York. And that really opened up. I'd studied politics. I'd been working in Northern Ireland. I was very interested in reconciliation and peace, but I had avoided any studies of the Middle East because I thought it was too complicated. And then I had 2 jobs in front of me. One was in Burkina Faso with street children, and one was in Ramallah at a Quaker school funded by the Friends United meeting. And I remember thinking, well, I love the cinema, I love movies, and I think there might be movies in Jerusalem. So why don't I take this job in this place called the West Bank? So in many ways, it was really helpful because I didn't really know what was going on. And I had grown up with many family friends who were Jewish, but I had no friends who came from a Muslim or a wider Arab background or Palestinian. So for me, it was quite fresh. And looking back, I'm grateful for that. And FUM called us missionaries. And I remember Sandra Gass and I being sent out as these 2 young teachers and thinking, I don't think I'm a missionary, but I think I'm going to learn from these people. And so when we got to the school, this beautiful old late 1800s, is it, Joyce?
Yes.
Beautiful stone school, and all girls at the time. And Joyce had her teaching with more technical issues. I was given ethics and math and gym. And it was a very moving time. And Joyce and I became friends quite quickly. And Joyce's dad was a runner, and he used to take us running through the West Bank, as well as help us get flights back home.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah. He loved that. He loved the company of taking the American teachers running with him, because he wanted to give them a safe place to run with. I remember that very keenly. My dad was a Quaker who never missed Sunday morning, and yeah, and he had a huge impact on me because he would take me to the meeting house every Sunday, and so that's his influence has also been very keen on me. Yeah, I think that Lindsey, I remember Sandra as well, and both of you became my very dear friends. And then the first Intifada started, and the schools were closed. And at that time, there was a Palestinian sort of underground movement that provided some guidance to the population of what to do, right, with the civil disobedience movement, also how to protect ourselves. There were neighborhood committees, etc. But interestingly, also what we did is we created clandestine type classrooms as well, where students came to our homes basically in secret, because Israel at that time announced a new law that there was a law against assembly, and any two people or more in an assembly was illegal at that time, meaning even a family, like, right, we're an assembly, right, is illegal. But they used that law to ensure that people are not gathering to coordinate and to plan how to resist occupation together. And I remember those clandestine classrooms, because some students would come to my house and I would teach them English. It was, forget about computer science, you know, we did some of the basics, but I'm curious about Lindsey's experience during that time when the Intifada actually started, and we had neighborhood committees, we were planting together, we were ensuring that we have self-sufficiency, we were out on the streets as well, demonstrating and protesting. You know, it was an amazing time for the community to come together. I remember, you know, protesting on the streets with everyone, you know, the old and the young and the rich and the poor, and everybody was out there together protesting. There was a general strike, so all the stores and shops and businesses would close at 1 o'clock, and so everybody could do their thing to protect the community together. And so that lasted, you know, a long time. And I'm curious about maybe Lindsey, because I have my memory, I have some distinct sort of things I remember about that time, of course, but I love it when other people who have experienced the same share things, because I may have missed them. So with my memory being a little poor. So Lindsey, I would love to hear more.
Yeah, Keith had asked about stories, and I had 3 words down. One was shock, one was kindness, and one was teaching in the refugee camps. So because everybody was trying to help out, as the foreign teachers, we went into the camps to teach English to the children there, but we had to hide from the soldiers. So there were many times when the children would warn us and we had to run out the back. As Joyce said, effectively, you would be arrested for teaching children. And that's a very strong memory, but it links to the kindness, because I remember someone knocked on the door. I was sharing a flat with my fellow American, Sandra, and they had a box of food, and they said, you know, you're all alone and this is food for you, and we're part of the committee to make sure everybody has enough food. And I nearly cried, because I'm a foreigner, I have a passport, I could walk out tomorrow, and they were giving me food, and that sort of support, that support. And at the time, as Joyce said, I myself didn't protest, but people were going out, women were taking off their high heels and walking down the street. Hamas didn't exist. It was a time of real sort of social strengthening and empowerment, that we're not going to do this. And it had started because there was a group of Palestinians, there was a car crash and they'd been killed, and more violence and killed by soldiers, and it had just kind of like a real match. But one thing I wanted to share too was, for me, there was the real shock, because as I said, I didn't know what was going on there. So in arriving, I learned what it meant to basically have a system which nullified a people. So there was one group who had rights and citizenship, and another group who did not have rights, who did not have the ability to go places. Their ID cards were a different ID cards, so they would be blocked from moving. The ID cards included their religion. They had different license plates. Everything was a human rights difference, and I had never come across that, and I'd read about this, but I hadn't understood what a real apartheid was. And military law, so you have no recourse to law. So your child is taken to the prison, you're not allowed to necessarily visit, you're not even made be told why they're in prison. And all that kind of awareness and shock in that. But then also many of us were shot, and in my case, I wasn't protesting, but it was the final day there was some protests, and we were just checking our students were okay, and I was trapped against a wall with tear gas on both sides, and an army jeep was across the street, and then they decided to leave, and they just pointed the gun and shot off a canister of metal bullets, hitting me in 5 places. And I mentioned that for 2 reasons. One is, of course, I wasn't the only person who'd been shot, but being a white American, it became a story. And it was a story that then the US consulate said, please, the Israeli Foreign Ministry wants to apologize. It's the first time they've ever offered to, could you go and get the apology? And I was 24 and quite naive, and I said, okay. But I had a Quaker, Himmet Edgar, who works on justice issues in the UK, dear friend who brought me really connected to Quakers. And before I went to this, he sent me a quick phone call, and he said, Lindsey, do not let them blame the victim. And I didn't know what he really meant, but he tried to explain it to me. So I get into this office with the foreign ministry, and I sit down, and the first thing they said was, well, what were you doing on the street? Why were you there? And I looked at them, and I stood up, and I said, if you're going to blame me for being shot by your soldier, I will leave now. And he said, no, I'm sorry, sit down, and it's apology. But I just wanted to say how sometimes we don't actually understand the manipulation or the mind games that are going on. And had I not had that kind of prepping, I wouldn't really have realized what I was walking into. But again, so many people were shot. So many American Palestinians had been shot, but I was a white non-Palestinian, and I got the special treatment.
Yeah. I mean, I remember my best friend in high school, when I was shot. That's before the Intifada, and I remember how close to home that was. But it brings me to sort of, this is my whole life, Keith. You asked about the first Intifada, but to me, it's like my whole life living under this brutal military rule, where Israel had controlled everything in my life, including my water, my electricity, and the air that I breathe. And this is sort of where, the first Intifada was sort of a time for jubilation, because wow, we are coming together. We are now resisting, and public opinion was very much shifting. Global public opinion. We're seeing, the Israeli tanks and this young kid with a little rock in his hand, throwing it at the huge, humongous tank in front of him. And that image has, resonated. And for the first time as Palestinians, we felt like, wow, our story is being heard. We are, people are looking at us as human beings, and recognizing this injustice that we have been living with for so long. And I remember, and then this is like bringing it back to now, and it's really sad. I was telling my husband the other day how I remember during the first Intifada, we were tallying those who were killed and martyred, right? And it was 1, and there's a strike, 2, and a strike. And oh my gosh, 10 killed. Oh my gosh. So far, months into it, 20 killed. And to us, that was a big, big loss, big deal, like to lose our people in front of our eyes, one by one. And juxtaposed to today, when in 24 hours, just yesterday, 50 Palestinians in one day were killed. Just yesterday, 50 Palestinians in Gaza were killed. And I think that, to me, like going back to how I was feeling about when one Palestinian was killed in 1988, to comparing it to now, and how we are dealing with it as Palestinians, it's like, how do we take that in? That it has moved from that to that level of genocide, really, and how do we take that in? And I think that is what we're toiling with today. But going back to that period, though, I don't want to move into now, but going back to that period, I remember that, and I continue, like things that I took from that period. the importance of community, the importance of mutual aid, and how we supported each other, the way we came together as a community to protect each other, and the importance of solidarity. And I think that to me was a very big lesson from that movement. Seeing, Lindsey and Sandra, my friends in the refugee camps, teaching and being with us. They did not desert us, right? At our hardest moments, they were there. They continued to be there. And to me, that was also a lesson in solidarity and how important it is to bring hope to communities. And so also juxtaposed to now, when I see the groups and people from all walks of life, all religions, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, everybody standing by the side of Palestinian rights in such a powerful way, putting their bodies on the line, I say it brings us hope. And so it's so powerful. And I've been saying this, solidarity is everything. And because for people who are oppressed, oftentimes they can't do it alone, and they can't resist alone, and they need the solidarity. They need people to give them that backbone. And so I think, to me, having Lindsey there and other American teachers and volunteers and activists with us on the ground did wonders in terms of giving us hope for our liberation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think I'm curious, speaking to both of you, how those personal experiences, both of you have taken up high pressure roles, ones that can take a lot out of us. Being a head of an organization, I know that is true. And I'm wondering how or in what ways those experiences, Joyce, throughout your life in Palestine, and Lindsey showing up in a war zone for the first time and experiencing that both at Ramallah Friends School and then later with the UN Relief Agency and elsewhere, working on the Oslo Accords. How did those experiences shape your callings and where you are today?
Do you want me to go first again, Lindsey? I'm happy to.
Right. Well, I had worldview, friendship, and calling, you wrote to us, Heath. And in worldview, I think what struck me, I mean, having also been working in Northern Ireland before that, it was a realization how these man-made decisions were creating the suffering, and very strongly about this sense of decisions are made and the impact on people and nature. At the time, I wasn't connected to nature. It was all about peace until I came and saw climate change and planetary crisis as a peace issue and a peace concern. Another thing for worldview was the silencing. I mean, the extraordinary lobby to silence anyone who talked about the abusive or lack of human rights or this whole military occupation was phenomenal. And I have never come across it since in such a systematic way. But I see that also in climate change. I see this kind of trying to hold the narrative and shift it. So I think, again, you're talking about blame the victim and all these lessons that come out of that time, the importance of witness and the importance of courage with love. But I then went on to work for the UN. I went back to work for the UN UNRWA, which is the organization supporting refugees, Palestinian refugees that's been under such attack during the Intifada, and then later went back to work in Gaza for 2 years for the Oslo, again the UN. I went with the UN to Somalia for the humanitarian crises there. And I went to the former Yugoslavia with the UN. We were the first to we discovered the first mass graves in that war. And all this kind of working together. Before then I had children and realized I couldn't walk into a war zone as easily as I had in the past. But I also want to mention friendship. I think the really strong friendships that you make in this space, because you're actually depending on someone else for your well-being, if you're not your life. And I didn't realize how much that affected me professionally until I started working in the UK in a kind of normal aid organization, and realized that I had a very different view about team building and working together and relying on each other. It was kind of abnormal, sort of supporting each other, but it was, to this day, it's very strong in how I work. And then just the calling, the peace and justice, working in war zones, working in humanitarian, witnessing suffering, and calling out where money and power are, decisions are causing greater suffering.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a big question, because it's not about just this period, it's about my whole life and how it shaped me and my experiences. When I was the head of the Ramallah Friends School, I also, for 13 years, I did that. And that was such a joy, because it was nice to come back to the school where I went. But also I got a sort of firsthand experience working with young people, and seeing their power and their creativity and their drive, and so I think I also took that with me, and so what really, and I spoke a little bit about, you know, what I learned about mutual aid and about solidarity, and I think that I sort of already spoke a little bit about what I've learned. But I think that's what brought me to AFSC. When I was approached to apply, I thought, well, that's just a perfect opportunity for me to take my own learnings, experiences, lived experiences with oppression, and expand that, and learn more about the oppressions all around the world and how everything is so interconnected. And I remember when I came to AFSC in the beginning, I had a lot to learn. I still have so much to learn. But one thing that really, really struck me after I did my whirlwind of travels around AFSC programs around the world and in the United States, and it struck me how struggles are so interconnected, and how powerful it is to bring the different struggles together. And I think that, to me, is what continues to inform and drive my calling to continue doing this courageous peace and social justice work in the world, because I see how it's all connected, and I see how people draw strength and power from each other, and connecting movements and connecting different oppressions, and the learning. When I remember leaders from the Black Lives Movement visited Palestine, and how powerful that is, and it was just amazing to see the interconnections. And so, to me, that continues to drive me, to drive my calling, and my waking up every morning saying, you know, we need to persevere and do this work, because it is really about the collective. It is really about the power of the people. It is really about us standing by justice and on the right side of history on this issue, and so many issues around the world, and climate justice is at the center of it. And we will, I'm sure, talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But to me, that is what keeps me motivated, to see that people in this global world can come together to make change, and climate is a perfect example, because it impacts all of us in the same way.
Well, I'm really moved. There's just last night I was having a conversation with folks about how it sort of derived from what I read earlier, how as a species at this point, we've reached a point where we're too powerful to remain in rivalry with ourselves. That at some level, the climate crisis, the presence of nuclear weapons in the climate crisis, the unfolding, you know, exponential technologies, et cetera, has put us all in a situation where we're kind of all in the war zone. And if we don't create global solidarity, global mutual aid, we rise together or we're going to fall together. And so it's really a moment that speaks to me. And I was really moved, Lindsey. What you were saying reminded me of that that experience of being in a war zone and knowing the teamwork when someone is relying on you for their life, and you're relying on them for yours. And like that level of solidarity, I think, is what we need. So we gotta step into the present, and I want to ask Joyce you this question first, and then we'll turn to Lindsey. You have a really unique vantage point on the intersection of these issues as the General Secretary of AFSC, working in so many different countries on so many different issues. And obviously, the rise of violence couldn't have gone unnoticed with Ukraine and what's happening in the Sahel, et cetera, across the world. And so I'm wondering about your experience of that rise of violence and then October 7th and the aftermath. How is that for you emotionally, like on a personal level? And then how has that affected, your sense of the work that needs to be done where we're at?
Yeah, that's a big question. Obviously, October 7th, that day was a day of great concern on a personal level. It was also a conflicting time for me because on the one hand, I wasn't happy and I wasn't supportive of the enormity of the suffering on the Israeli side and the loss of innocent lives. As a Quaker, and as a person in general, I could never stand by that and condone it in any way or form. So that was something that I really struggled with. At the same time, I understood that this is like a what do you call it? A pressure cooker pot that exploded, and I understood that resistance is going to happen when there is such a acute oppression going on, and people will choose different ways to resist. And so, putting that aside, I was petrified about what's to come. And today, I don't think I would have imagined the level of belligerency that Israel has chosen to take. And I had never in my wildest dreams had imagined that the world would allow it to happen, and that my government here in the United States would be complicit and would be supporting and sending arms and not leveraging its power to put a stop to it. Nothing in my life and my upbringing and my childhood prepared me to how I would deal with the genocide of my people. And I remain today, I stopped having words, honestly. I mean, I don't know what to say anymore. And every Palestinian in the world is struggling like I am. We see our people killed every day in the most ugly, belligerent ways. Children still 9 months in, being taken out of the rubble, killed, mothers mourning, and I stopped knowing how to talk about it, knowing that the world is not doing anything to stop it. So on a personal level, emotionally, I'm a mess. I say it, I'm a mess. Every Palestinian is a mess. Everything I do is, you know, I take a shower and I'm like, oh, but they don't have water. I laugh at, you know, or I have fun with my friends and I'm like, oh, maybe that's not, you know, my people are struggling. I shouldn't be having fun. And so it's like every day and everything that we do is impacted. And so so emotionally it's hard to really go by day. But on the flip side, I think also because I work for AFSC, it's brought me into a space where there's just so much to be hopeful for and thankful for in the movement. In AFSC has raised so much money for humanitarian aid, right, for Gaza. We have staff in Gaza. I worry about them every day. We communicate on the Signal channel, that chat channel, and every day I'm like, are they alive? Are they safe? And they've moved, you know, and we're displaced, forced out from one place to the other, to the other, many times. And now they're intense, and then they send us pictures of the aid that they distributed. And my mind is just blown away with their resiliency and their commitment to helping others while they're going through this. And so that gives me a lot of energy to go on, that, you know, we're saving lives here, and that's important. And our advocacy, although, yeah, we have 100 Congress members who are now calling for a ceasefire, you know, to me, that's a shift. But on the ground, it's not really stopping anything, you know, and so to me, that is a concern that we have failed in our advocacy as much as we try and call, and we have action hours, and I'm at the White House and I'm at the State Department and talking, you know, there is a shift, and I think that's good. But we are yet to see that shift translate into work on the ground, making a difference and stopping the onslaught and the ethnic cleansing that is taking place today. And so that's, to me, where I sit now. I feel like we need to stay on course, and we need to keep working and calling for a permanent ceasefire, calling for humanitarian aid to keep flowing in, to, you know, the funding of UNRWA, which was frozen by the US. We need to also continue calling for our government to stop fueling this military onslaught on Gaza. And so, but also more than that, I'm encouraged also by some efforts by AFSC teams to also be thinking about, like, what happens after, hopefully, we pray for a ceasefire. What is our role in terms of advocacy and to ensure that we're not going back to the status quo, and what is the role of the US government? So we're having all of these discussions. So to me, it's like, yes, I'm distraught on one end, but it's all hands on deck on the other, that we need to keep going. Because if we stop, then you know what's going to happen, you know, and so they will have an empty, there will be no resistance, and when there's no resistance and no, then they can go all the way. And so I am committed to continue supporting not just the AFSC effort, but the global effort in ensuring that we continue to push towards a just solution to the Palestine-Israel question, because I believe that in that little spot of land called the Holy Land, two peoples can live together, and in harmony and in peace. There has to be a way to get us there.
I'm just, yeah, Lindsey, I want to put the same question to you, and Joyce, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And I'm going to take this question and move it into the Earthcare and
Yeah,
peacemaking as well, because there's
absolutely.
a phrase I want to bring in. But on the 7th of October, I was just in shock. I thought, this is completely suicidal. What do you? I think the Hamas attack was actually far more successful than they expected, based on where the Israeli troops were. But also, Israel has one of the most right-wing governments right now. So they did this attack at a time when many Israelis were protesting night after night to reclaim a more democratic Israel. And what happened is, the minute you do an attack like that, you shut down any protest within the country. So there was this, what are you doing? But then I thought, okay, wider view. Gaza's been under siege for 10 years, let alone a military occupation for over 50. And when I mean siege, you cannot leave. You cannot go out. You're in a trap. It's 2 million people. It's one of the most densely populated in the world. Anything in and out, the whole economy is strangled. Trying to live there is extraordinarily tough in a day-to-day. And then also, I mean, I'm no fan of Hamas, but what you saw was there was a normalization increasingly of relations between Israel and other Arab states. And so I think this sense of threat that we've got to do something. So you have this pressure cooker, as Joyce said. But for me, I also thought, right, the reaction to this will be define the threat. So like 9/11, a group of Saudis hit targets in the US and caused thousands of deaths, but we don't address the Saudi Arabian issue. We go into Afghanistan and then we go into Iraq. So this whole thing of how we react to this made me think of 9/11, and that will define what's going on. And of course, you suddenly have a collective punishment of 2 million people. 70% at least of the whole Gaza Strip is destroyed. As Jeannie Ratcliffe just put in, the profound, not only the profound loss of life, but also the profound, you've crushed now all this cement, the emissions from the military, the emissions from the destruction, the emissions from rebuilding. So, we link into the peace building and the Earthcare in a minute, but it's also this kind of moral corruption that now we're then arresting our young people for protesting a genocide. And we have the International Court of Justice actually recognizing the genocide aspects of what's happening. And I think what's also linking into the peace building side, the International Court of Justice also just recognized that the occupation is illegal and that member states of the UN have the obligation to implement international law. So, and the International Criminal Court has also come out. So there's suddenly this phrase where international courts are coming in and making decisions. And of course, we're waiting for a climate change decision from the International Court of Justice. And this suddenly, the states like the US or certain European states, the UK included, who worked hard to create these international bodies to avoid any future wars, are now suddenly having it in their face because they don't like the conclusions. So there is a huge shift going on. But I want to quote Nathan Thrall. Nathan Thrall is a Californian, an American Jew who is a writer and also an academic and a peacemaker who had moved to Israel to work on peace and justice for all peoples there, and talks very clearly about the human rights situation and sees it through a rights lens. You have one people with rights, one without. But he talked about the violence of the calm. So pre-7th of October, the violence of the calm, the violence of having an oppressive structure that is systemically oppressing and nullifying another group of people. And I think about the violence of the calm when we look at Earthcare and peacemaking. And that's why I wanted to shift into that too as well, because our calm, there's a violence in our systems, a structural violence. Is not just about being in a war zone. And so when we look at these issues now, for example, we know that oil and gas and coal, we're working on coal, but oil and gas, the fossil fuels are the prime emissions drivers of these existential rates of global warming. And what's happening is that wealthy countries, including the US profoundly, but also developed and developing, but all the developed countries that had committed to reducing, are increasing their oil and gas. And there is a violence in that. And I just wanted to shift that in, because we have a structural violence that isn't just about war zones, but also, again, and we can, I'll be quiet now, but our huge military budgets. As Americans, our budget is over 800 billion. It's increasing. The global budget is 2.4 and increasing. It's the highest rate of increase of military spending, I am told, since World War II, if not before World War II. And that kind of spending, and then you hand out 17.5 million for loss and damage for people who have already affected by climate change when you're the historical emitter. So there's a violence going on in our own ways of engaging.
Well, the way when we're holding something this heavy together, I think what brings me hope is when I hear stories of profound courage and love in relationship to that, because I think that as hard as these times are, and honestly will be, it's courage and love that carry us through. And it's actually in those moments we see types of courage in ourselves and others that we sometimes didn't know we had, and often we didn't know others had. And so I want to just weave that in as we carry this, because I'm feeling the weight of it. I'm feeling the weight of all of this, of what's happening, and just remembering that. But I want to turn and ask you one more question, Lindsey, before we kind of, this is related to Earthcare and peacemaking, as a person who shows up at COP27, COP28 in Dubai, et cetera, you're experiencing, COP28 in Dubai, this is post October 7th, right? This is after all of these, Middle Eastern bloc countries are in a very tense situation. And that shifts the way in which, dialogues around every global issue, any global issue we're trying to solve happen. But I want to hear specifically your experience in that, the Global Plastics Treaty, what's the shift that happens when we have countries in rivalry in this way? What happens to global agreements, and what's the connection there?
Well, if you can imagine 2015, so less than 10 years ago, we had the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai Humanitarian Pact, and some profound agreements that came through. So it can happen, right? It can happen. Right now, we're probably in one of the most tense international times that I have experienced in my work internationally. And it's not just about, say, the Middle East crisis. If China and the US are talking, things move, at least for climate. If they're talking, that's how the Paris Agreement got through. So this whole building of trust between countries, there is a realignment right now of allies, of Russia, isolation of Russia, they're going to China, they're looking at India. Everybody's kind of trying to move around to go into new groups, which is, again, with the military spending, incredibly dangerous. But I think that when you have more trust, then you see how there is that desire to build and act on these issues. But when that trust is broken, so not only what's happening in the Middle East, but just in general, the agreements that you made, you're stepping back from them, then you're really struggling to have any new action. And I think that what's really quite moving is when you see a country like our own in the United States or in Canada. I'm talking to not primarily North Americans here, but I see some others from other parts of the world on the call. But as developed countries with historical responsibility for what's happening and continued, I mean, the US plans for oil and gas would blow us alone out of 1.5, and we're already passing 1.5. When you actually see planned and acting and taking responsibility and acknowledging the responsibility and then acting in the finances, then you build trust. And you can build trust within the climate space, even if you're struggling in the Middle East. So I just wanted to share that, because it's a more complex relationship sometimes.
And I really want to bring you in, Joyce. I think that people think a lot about there's a number of things that I think have become popularized for at least folks who pay a decent amount of focus on climate around the relationship there. The US military's own analysis that climate change is a threat multiplier, I think, is something folks have ran into, that when we see climate disasters moving through, famines, et cetera, this intensifies tensions in regions, and there's a strong correlation between those events and the arising new conflicts, et cetera. We talk about that. We talk about military budgets as well. And just any money that you're putting into the insane amount of fossil fuels the military uses, but also, B, the just any money that's going into making the world, in essence, a worse place. Like increasing the amount of money we're spending on killing one another. Every dollar that goes to that doesn't go to transitioning our economy to a sustainable economy, and creating the kind of human aid that is necessary to create resilience in equatorial regions and elsewhere. So I think that that's really stark, but I think an experience you have that I don't have, and I actually have a lot of curiosity about, is you get to show up in places like the State Department. You get to show up in places like the White House. You get to talk to the Pope. You've had some of these experiences talking to some power brokers in relationship to these issues. And I wonder if those experiences have given you more insight into how these things can shift. Or, I'm just hoping to hear you speak about that, because I think that's the dimension we don't hear as much about, is that, in order to do global Earth care related issues, we need to get along in a totally different way. We need to develop some level of solidarity globally and domestically.
Right. I think one thing I get out of it is something that also Lindsey alluded to, is that it's really part of the same system, what we're seeing around the world. It's those same systems of oppression from corporations and their role in exasperating impacts on communities, it's all part of that holistic system that is interconnected. And so we need to speak about the system rather than just the individual cases. And I think what we have brought in as AFSC is something, when we had our strategic planning process, there was a very big push for us to really hone in on the climate issue. And although we're not your traditional climate organization, but I think we do bring in, because we're so embedded in communities, we bring in the voices of the communities that are impacted by this injustice. And I think that, to me, with whomever I speak, I'm always trying to bring the voices and to ensure that when we talk about solutions, and we also center the voices and the agencies of those most impacted. And so that, to me, has always been the message that I brought in to these conversations, because oftentimes these are neglected. And to really move towards climate justice, and looking at it from a systems perspective, from the community level up, and making it critical to collaborate across the different movements, different silos, and to leverage those strengths as we move forward within that. So to me, that is the power of the work that we do, is that we connect the expertise in peace, migration, economic justice, all of that, and how we build those connections. And I think that a lot of times when we talk about climate justice, we also ignore the issue of environmental justice and the impact on individuals, and the equity part, the sort of, that there's an equity question there as well. And so, yes, when we look at it holistically, military budgets, I think someone said to me that if the world's militaries were a country, it would have the 4th largest carbon footprint in the world. And so you have to look at it from all angles together. And I think that's what we try to bring as an organization, is that there's the link to the bigger advocacy research pieces with the on the ground work with communities, with the public narrative change sort of work in the middle. And so the different approaches is also something that we have to take into account when we want to address these huge challenges in front of us.
Well, I know, Joyce, that recently AFSC has looked into hiring a climate justice coordinator, and I think maybe that got put on a back burner or something. I was
No.
following this closely as someone who's really excited about all of this, but I'm curious. Really, this
Yeah.
question goes out to both of you: how you're seeing climate justice in this work, and how you're seeing the connections between peace and justice here. And I'll just name for folks in the audience, we just hit the turn of the hour, and this is really the moment where we are thinking about starting to bring in y'all's questions. So if you want to start stewing on that, this would be a great time to start doing so. And then following this question, I think we'll start bringing folks in.
You know, we did bring a climate justice consultant. She's working with us because we wanted to be able to map what we're already doing. We do so much around the world and in the United States, but we wanted someone to help us map it and also help us articulate it, like where is our niche in this big realm of climate justice work. And so we're excited to work with her in the hope that we will get some answers and also highlight opportunities for us of how to direct our energies, you know. But to answer the justice, you know, I think that we have moved far away from the days when environmental and climate issues were framed in the middle class issues of the privileged, and thanks to the hard work of communities and activists in the global south and also frontline communities like this one in the global north, there's now an understanding that justice has to be centered in how we understand and deal with the climate crisis. And as I said, inequality intersects with climate justice and climate change in deadly ways to cause the greatest impact on those who have the least resources. And I think justice is now at the heart of the demands of all actors. In Cambodia, for example, AFSC office is working with communities displaced by hydropower projects because we believe that when solutions to the climate injustice are shaped by the more powerful and political actors who want to serve their own interests, communities are shortchanged. So we're trying to work with communities who who say, you know, there are other solutions and that center our needs. And so from a justice perspective, we have been working with drought-impacted communities in the Horn of Africa, to indigenous people fighting the deforestation of their ancestral land in the Amazon, and in the United States, low-income neighborhoods and incarcerated people. I was reading about how prisons in the United States are impacted by climate change, and when it's so hot and there is no opportunities for even air conditioning, and how that impacts them, and our role in AFSC to advocate for the incarcerated. So there's a lot of angles that bring justice. To me, everything we do has to be justice framed, because as you said earlier, Keith, it's really about the root causes and really digging in. What we're looking at is a crisis that is rooted in unequal colonial patterns of resource misuse for over centuries, and we know that the richest countries have, you know, disproportionately caused this emergency, and we need to look at it from an inequality dominance lens to be able to find the solutions. And so and I think that's the only way to adequately address the issue.
Well, Lindsey, same question to you.
So I just want to reflect on what we're seeing in that wider work. And it's not only climate change, if you forgive me, I'm going to also talk about, I mean, planetary crises would include species extinction, which is at the greatest crisis right now. Chemical pollution, increasing global temperatures, fresh water, soil use, et cetera, et cetera. But what's so striking is that the root causes driving, or the human activities driving these existential rates, unprecedented in our human history, is that they're quite similar for those planetary crises. And there's a hope there, because when you're transforming certain ways of agriculture, certain energy systems, certain economic systems, then you are actually helping the range. And the justice comes in because so much of the systems we have are tied up in a money power role, and have been for centuries. This isn't new, right? But so when we are looking at, for example, how do you mitigate emissions? How do you adapt to climate change? How do you support people in loss and damage? And the whole justice question comes in there, because you realize the how, as Joyce was saying, you know, a huge dam, or in this case, for example, we're going to invest in carbon capture storage and pump all the emissions in the ground, but we'll end up using those emissions for more fracking. There are profound justice systems on how we do transformation, or we're not doing transformation. We're actually going to maintain the root causes, because fossil fuels and industrial agriculture and unsustainable economic systems make a few people a lot of money and a lot of people dependent. So for me, the justice is about really, as Joyce alluded, you know, shifting the ownership as well, the decentralization of energy, primarily in renewables, community-owned energies. Renewable energy doesn't make people money, those who were controlling the energy, but it makes communities more resilient and in many ways wealthier. If you put solar onto poor communities' roofs, you have a transformation in the poverty system. You have a certain ownership. If you strengthen land tenure and land rights, you know, there's a whole, our supermarkets have tied up our food systems so profoundly, and the companies that actually behind the supermarkets. So it's looking at the justice in ways of how do we actually transform those drivers that are affecting not only emissions, but also species extinction and land destruction and chemical pollution, et cetera. And for me, that's always a justice on the how. And it's what we're seeing now when we're seeing in these big COPs, for example, or I'm going off to a climate science conference for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And there we will have our wealthy fossil fuel countries pushing for carbon capture storage, even though it is less effective, less efficient, and maintains more fossil fuels, and actually holds the emissions in quite leakage, and then doesn't actually do the transformation of what's needed. And you see how that's a justice issue. What is the way that you're proposing to transform, and who will actually be benefiting, right? And so those questions we have to always ask in everything that we're seeing. But I think communities can do a lot of example witnessing in how they want to live, because they may not be able to wait for their national governments to make those policies.
And I just wanted to double on that a little bit, Keith, because I always want to bring examples from what I'm seeing on the ground. And last year I visited our work in Guatemala, and we visited the Ixil Mayan community, and we saw how corporations, Italian corporations, American corporations build this dam and to generate electricity to sell to other countries, and left that community without means of livelihood and water. It dried up their river, and we visited their homes where they don't even have electricity themselves, right? And so what we're trying to do is work with them, on ensuring that they have what they need to advocate for their rights, for reparations, for ensuring that that their resources that they own they have ways of regaining some, at least get some electricity back, you know. And but also, so we're working very, very hard. We're working with these communities to ensure that they have the skills to advocate within their government, And, and so the same in Laos. And I wanted to just share with you, because I know the time is tight, but I want to share with you a quote from one of our community members and staff members, Ruwaida, who says the following. In the civil society organizations movement, we envision fostering a collective movement to fight for climate justice in line with the fight for social change that is fair to women, men, and other vulnerable groups. Civil society organizations can play a role in monitoring progress towards climate justice, including monitoring the commitments of countries involved in global agreements. And so to me, this was her quote is saying that, we have the power and we have the solutions. And I think our role is to continue centering the community voice and giving them the agency that they have to address the challenges they face.
Well, I thank you so much. I think that this is a good time for folks to start raising their hands. If you have any questions for Joyce and Lindsey, and I'll just throw in a couple 2 cents at the end of this. A message that seems really central to me is that there's sort of 2 stories we're telling there. There's one story that I think is equally true. One would reflect like the Marxist analysis of international relations, and the other one reflects the realist analysis, which is, on one hand, there's these power brokers across nations that have incredible wealth and power, and they coordinate to oppress and extract money from the imperial periphery. And then the other side is that there's real tensions between those power brokers, the US and China, for instance, and that our survival depends on shifting that. And so I think we really need to develop, as Quakers, I think our spiritual responsibility, going back to that central point about love and courage, is to develop movements that have the spiritual gravity to be a unifying force in a time of great peril and great change. So with that, I want to turn to our first hand raise. We have Cherie. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Anyone else, raise hands. We only got one so far.
Hi, I want to raise up regeneration of Earth ecosystems as a way to reverse deserts, to restore the water cycle, to bring back biodiversity, to increase food supply from people working in community, sharing healthy soil as their common ground, to rebuild ecosystems with regeneration, regenerative agriculture, restoring forests, restoring shade and the water cycle. That would totally reverse climate change. Have I used the words climate change? No. That means the 75% of people in the United States that don't want to hear about climate change can hear healthy soil is our common ground. So how might this play out in the Mideast, where water is such an issue? The aquifers are being depleted. To everyone practice regenerative agriculture and the abundance, the natural abundance of the Holy Land, and people living in community, living together as they have before. How might this bring peace?
Thanks, Cherie. I could, from the perspective of Palestine, where water and aquifers have been stolen by the Israeli government and by settlers to make settlements flourish. I often wonder how that, what in the midst of oppression, how do you even begin to talk about equitable and just sharing of resources, right? When you have a power dynamic that is ensuring that resources are diverted to one population over the other. And so I think,
But what if they
yeah,
were both doing it and everyone was doing it in community?
yeah,
It is everyone in community.
that would, Lindsay.
I think that would be brilliant. I think part of the problem with Israel-Palestine is that land is taken by the military, so you have no control, or the olive trees are all cut down. But restoration of land is essential, and thank you for bringing that up. Also wanted to bring up reduction of energy, reduction of consumption, reduction of meat. Restoring ecosystems is critical. One thing I wanted to say, though, is something called nature-based solutions is being pushed as a mitigation, so reducing emissions. And the worry about that is that they're pushing these nature-based solutions without actually wanting and reducing the emissions from the main drivers in our energy economics and our agriculture. And the reason that that is scary is that you can put all your money into sort of nature-based solutions, which is different from restoring ecosystems. That's adaptation. That is critical. But if you use it as an excuse that you're mitigating, what we're seeing is that temperatures are already being locked in to higher temperatures because we're not rapidly reducing our emissions. And there is something in the IPCC that talks about land is right now a sink, and as temperatures increase, land becomes a source. So the increase in fires, etc. So when we talk about we've got to restore our ecosystems, and we do that as part of adaptation, while we have to rapidly reduce emissions from our human activities that are driving those. So I just wanted to raise that political point there.
I'm just going to name that there's a number of folks who asked questions in the chat. So, a few of them, Nathan Schroyer was actually, I think, mentioned. Nathan Schroyer had a question, a few others. So if you do want to share, please raise your hand now so we can get you. But for now, I'll go to Trevor Evans.
Hello, can you hear me? Good. I wondered if you would comment on the Ukraine war in this context, because that must be one of them even more destructive of international peace and the environment through the effect on the energy crisis. And what are the prospects for bringing these two countries together in their own mutual benefit, because they are the countries which are most suffering from the consequences of their conflict. And is QNO and having any dialogue with people on that subject?
So at QNO in Geneva, we do not do country specific. We work on themes. So we would work on the arms trade. We would work on economic systems, human rights, etc., as they're affected in Ukraine and Russia, but in all countries. So we don't do specific Ukraine, Russia. But what we do see is this increase in military spending. There are some people really benefiting from funding military into these countries, right? And so I would say that yes, it's been a huge earthquake for us in terms of world peace. But look what's happening in Sudan. Nobody's talking about it. And so when I talk about peace and justice, I would say it's not just there, it's everywhere. But in terms of the whole sort of shift in our alliances, how do we maybe not isolate those countries? How do we not isolate Russia? How do we actually deal with what's going on here in a way that's not feeding it?
Thank you. So Stan Becker. Oh, Stan, why don't you write it in the chat? It's doing the same thing it did like 2 months ago, but I'll read it for you if you put your question in the chat. Yeah, we're not hearing you. We're hearing little squeaks, but it's like not coming through. Put it in the chat and I'll read it. For now, let's step on to Brad.
Thanks. There's a lot that's been said that makes me think in various ways. And I appreciate the fact that you have spun perspective for me. particularly in interpretation of large understandings. Some of the list of problems in terms of the environment and peace and so forth, Keith sort of said it better, and I can't remember well enough to quote him. So I'm going to paraphrase what I remember is we're dealing with these large power structures that are elephantine, and it's difficult when, and I'll speak with when I feel like the flea on the elephant, that I can be an irritant sometimes, but that's about all I can do is just pinch the elephant. And I'm wondering, do you have in your sense of experience, Keith had mentioned earlier about some of the people you talk to at the power levels, you know, like the Pope and so. I was impressed with that one in particular, the Pope. Do you have any sense of hope that the elephant can be moved?
Thanks, Brad. You have to always have hope, of course. I'm gonna, cite some examples, and it's because it's really about some shifts, piece by piece, and that's how it happens. I want to just give you a few examples of the work that we are doing around making companies who are complicit and profiting from oppressive systems, be it occupation, war, military, detention of migrants, etc. AFSC has been a leader in the divestment movement. So I just want to give that as an example. And we are making a connection between fossil fuel divestment to target corporate actors like Chevron, for example, who are fueling both the climate crises and military occupations and wars. And we are also trying to make visible the struggles of those displaced by conflict, right? But when we target the corporations through campaigns, so our campaign now is targeting Chevron, and we're trying to put pressure on these corporations, and we have succeeded, and the movement of divestment has succeeded in some of those corporations changing their approaches or closing down plants for example, in settlements or in Israel. So we are trying to leverage the whole work on in making the case to investors, universities, corporations, faith movements, churches, that they also have to have a commitment and responsibility to not fuel and to not support and invest in these oppressive systems through these companies. And so we have a huge, I'm going to put it in the chat, you will see we have an investment screen where people can screen their investments. But I hope that answers your question, that it really has to happen piece by piece, and we need to keep moving in a steadfast way to ensure that we continue to challenge these corporations.
And I would just say, I think the elephant is shifting, and climate negotiators say people have to stay, they have to keep protesting, because if people aren't on the streets, if people aren't writing to their politicians, if people aren't speaking out, our ministers are never going to do enough. So they're actually encouraging that. And I do see the elephant. I mean, 15 years ago, climate change was a niche discussion. It's not now. And we're in this kind of, I would say, almost a fight. I don't want to use that kind of violence, but it is human beings don't want to give up their toys, but actually it is so clear what is happening and why and where we need to transform, that I don't see us going back. But it needs people to step up and keep talking and being witness, and also giving examples. And I think telling the story, because if you tell the story is always about doom, you don't actually tell the story about a healthier world. You don't tell the story about a more regenerative forest outside. You don't tell the story of what we could be doing that's not so polluting and that we don't die of air pollution, but we have a different way of working. And I think Quakers have a very powerful voice in that positive story of action. Charles Lamb, you just spoke about CUNO and the work with bringing countries together. That does happen with CUNO. It can happen in our houses when we use it. We tend to work more on trying to strengthen international law so that affects all countries under the same challenge. But we bring countries together all the time to sit in Quaker House. So I do quiet diplomacy with negotiators at the climate change negotiations for the last 12 years, bringing very diverse countries together. We do that on human rights. We do that on all these issues. But we have also, as CUNO, brought countries together who are in conflict. So it's a mix. It's a mix. But on the surface, we're not specifically in Geneva working on country to country.
Well, wow, we have only 4 minutes on the books left, and I'm guessing Joyce and Lindsey, are you do we have 10 minutes extra, or is 12:30 a hard cutoff? Okay,
I can do 10 minutes. Yeah.
10 minutes. We'll keep it a hard 10 minutes extra. So I want to bring in Stan's question here. Stan asks, this is an out-of-the-box vision. It seems that Israel has destroyed most of Gaza. And Israel reportedly has over 100 illegal settlements in the West Bank. And we also know from history that countries with land separated by another country does not work, e.g. East and West Pakistan. Therefore, the proposal is Israel rebuild Gaza. Then there is a controlled but methodical movement of people from Gaza to the West Bank, and at the same time, a movement in the reverse direction of all Israelis living in illegal settlements in the West Bank. So I think that's a question to you, Joyce, about your sense about that as a way of approaching the crisis in Palestine.
I wish it were so simple, but I mean, that's to me, it's on a personal level. I'm not seeing what I see it differently, because I'm seeing this government of Israel, not just this right-wing government, but historically, the vision and the actions of these governments have been very, very consistent in ensuring that they make the territories so difficult to live in, whether through a genocide or through a systemic oppression of Palestinians on the West Bank, or land grabbing and in the West Bank to build settlements, etc. It's been so systemic to get people out, and that's sort of the ethnic cleansing part of it. So unfortunately, I want to be hopeful. But from where I sit today, I think that the solution is not sort of it's not at our front door yet. And while you pose some interesting ideas for some sort of solution, I don't see it happening. I see that there's going to unfortunately be continued aggression, continued attempts to move people out. We've been hearing talks about the efforts of the Israeli government to annex the West Bank as well. So I believe Israel has an interest in everything from the river to the sea, and it wants to retain the control of that, because there are also water resources and gas and water and all of that they want control over. And so it is not as easy. My hope is that maybe when new governments emerge, more courageous governments, more governments and leaders who are committed to the humanity of all, and to believing that we can all live in this piece of land from the river to the sea in peace and harmony and with dignity for all. Until we have those leaders in place, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Joyce. So I think we have Nathan coming up next. Nathan, you had a few questions. So if you want to pick one and we can move forward with that.
Yeah, I'll just try and synthesize one. It's for Joyce, but it picks up on you and Lindsey both saying how if the United States and China are together, then the world can fix what you called the peace with the earth and peace on earth. And I totally have experienced that. I experienced in 2016, 2015 when that Paris Accord happened. And at that time, we had 7 years to get 7 billion people to consume at $7,000, or we were all going to go over a 2021 cliff. And that was 3 years ago. So I live with small children that went over that cliff. And yet you speak about the personal way of corporately engaging within friends, communities, in a way that would perhaps ask or offer systems for the structures to change from your experience. And I agree with that. I think that's what friends have. How do we do that? How do we make that actionable? I hear it in the United Nations, but I also heard people talking about creating new forms of regenerative redistribution. Thank you.
So what I see when you work at that international level, what I love is that we're articulating and forming ideals of what could be. And many countries, most countries, if not all countries, don't actually live up to that ideal, but we have this space where we identify what should be just and peace law, what should be just international law, right? And it gives us that goal. If you're living in a country that's very oppressive, you know that there is another way and you can use that. We were just talking to a Philippine colleague about the importance of actually engaging in the Human Rights Council for him, even though Philippines is nowhere near there. But I think we cannot wait. We have those laws, they're soft laws. We use them to pressure politically within our countries. But we need to also find ways within our communities to do what we were doing in Palestine back in 1987, you know, having more community-based connections on our food distribution, building a community energy sort of, that's happening. It's happening in certain places. Talking to people, bringing them together, thinking, how could we do this more healthily in our community? Because we need to build resilience. And if you look at the UK right now, my husband's from the UK, there are people, and many Quakers included, getting themselves arrested to protest against increased fossil fuel extraction. And they're getting arrested and they're blocking the courts and they're getting arrested just for holding a poster, right? So it's becoming almost surreally ridiculous, the legal system. And that's what we can do, is we can push that boundary, which Quakers do so beautifully historically. Keep pushing the boundaries of what is more sane and just and resilient and regenerative, not only doing it within our communities, because you can start with your own self. You can try to raise money to get solar on some of your poorest areas, right? You could talk about community agriculture where you're actually doing education to reduce energy use or reduce consumption of meat or whatever it is, and how that helps. So I think it's both having those ideals at the UN, where climate, if China and the US are speaking and working together, yes, we have more progress in those COPs. But in the meantime, we get on with our communities and we show examples.
So Paul, I think as much as we can for these last 2 questions, let's try to keep them tight.
Thank you. It's been a really great session. Isn't the elephant in the room that we're all failing to name capitalism? Isn't that what is driving this? And does the Quaker commitment to truth lead us to actually use the word capitalism and say this is an aim? It's not an Anthropocene we're experiencing, it's a capitalist scene. that is destroying the earth? And as Quakers, do you think we should be called to have a witness and testimony more against capitalism, even if we don't know yet what that witness might look like?
Joyce, do you want to go ahead or shall I?
Go for it.
So at CUNO in Geneva, we have a Sustainable and Just Economic Systems program. We have put our resources into that and to highlight, because, I mean, yes, I would say our capitalism, our economic systems, but it's even beyond. If we're not careful, it becomes an ideological fight. But if you have an economic system based on using unlimited use of natural resources, when you live on a planet with limited natural resources, of course it's crazy, and Kenneth Boulding was telling us that back in the 1960s, right? So yes, we highlight it very much in our work, and it is the elephant in the room. I think we know what we need to do on energy if we decide to do it, including more efficient homes and reduction of energy use, right? Not just shifting. We know what we need to do on agriculture if we choose to do it, on our diet, everything. We know that. Economic systems, big elephant in the room. And I praise any young people who are studying economics, because we need to be looking at new ways. We talk about circular economy, we talk about donut economy, we talk about sufficiency, which CUNO pushed into the IPCC report, into their summary. It was in their major research, and we got it mentioned in the IPCC 6 assessment report summary, because it's all about what is sufficient. And so for me, it's the big pressure, but we need more people engaging on it, because people are afraid. They don't know what else they're supposed to do. But yes, capitalism, our economic systems. In fact, the IPCC, and I'll shut up, the IPCC 6 assessment report and the 5th assessment report. Well, the 6th assessment says main drivers include production and consumption, unsustainable production and consumption. The 5th assessment report actually said, and this is 2013-14, said the greatest driver of emissions is economic growth, right? Based on fossil fuel dependence. So it names it, but our states are, tell me a politician that talks about we have to shift our economic systems.
I think just to add very quickly on that, I think we use the term rapacious capitalism and working against that, because I think there's been some discussion at AFSC is like, what is the alternative? But I think we see the what we do at AFSC is we in all parts of the world and the United States, including New Mexico and other states, we support local efforts to manage land towards food justice and equity that are also based on indigenous and ecological principles, and so building what we call a solidarity, or what is referred to as a solidarity economy principles. We also help build an economy that is more fair in its distribution of wealth. And so I think that kind of is some sort of a way to challenge the capitalism as we have seen it exacerbate inequality and contribute to the climate crisis as well. So.
Well, I'm in a state of heartbreak here. Liz Robinson is a close friend. I stayed with her not too long ago, and she's got, I mean, you two need to meet Liz Robinson, and Liz Robinson, obviously, you need to meet the two of them. She is a mover and shaker across Pennsylvania and Philadelphia regarding these issues.
Let's take her question.
Yeah. Okay, we can. Liz, do you want to share your question? Yeah.
Yeah. So I work in solar and energy efficiency principally, and given that solar is now the cheapest form of energy anywhere in the world, and it is within reach of everyone, I'm wondering, I see solar as a democratic energy resource, and it is something that can be scaled very small, scaled very large. It can, really put a lot of power into the hands of people who don't have power. And for me, the continued dependence of nations on fossil fuel, whether they're poor nations or rich nations, is self-defeating and really critically important for the world to shift now to solar. And because solar is wind is wonderful, large hydro is wonderful, but solar can be very small, and you can use the power in very small quantities. So I'm just wondering what your organizations do to try to strengthen the connection between peace and solar.
We've actually published a paper called Decentralized Renewable Energy as a Peace-Building Approach.
Oh, great.
And we wrote that for policymakers to show examples of how decentralized renewable energies can build peace within communities, can also empower, bring more equity, etc. So I'm right with you. Here's what we're seeing internationally. You need grants to do that. And countries don't want to give grants. The most of loss and damage, climate finance, adaptation, mitigation, you name it, is loans. The majority is loans. Therefore, what we are pushing for is grant money so you can get solars onto those communities. And what I love about solar is that people, as you know, who have solar panels become far more aware of the energy they use, right? So it's not just about creating energy, they're actually more empowered to use less or to share it. But we see it as a peace-building approach. And it's about money and it's about control. And just briefly, in Pakistan, for example, the government was criticizing people who put solar on their roofs because it was taking energy payments away from the national grid. Because once you had solar, you no longer had to pay into the system. So it's also how we transform our national grids and how we empower people who want to put solar on their land, that they can do it and feed into the grid rather than being punished, right? So I think it's about making it open to my mother, who can stick it all on her lawn if she wants to, and can do that and actually earn some money from it. That's the equity.
Sure. Could you possibly put the link to your report in the chat?
Yes, I will try to do that. Yes.
Thank you.
I can just add quickly one example, Liz, also from us in New Mexico, for example. We've supported farmers to build 34 passive solar cold frames so they can grow crops through the colder months without fossil fuels, and enabling year-round income and local food in the winter. So we have solarized a commercial kitchen run by an indigenous partner. And earlier this year, we worked with a farmer to solarize his well. He had to bring electricity into a new field and decided to not use the typical fossil fuel system, but work with us to make a new model for solar panels on the farm that power his well. So yeah, so once again, we do different things with different communities across the world. And because we did speak more about Palestine and Gaza, I am going to put a link in the chat about how also Israel has caused so much damage to solar energy and grids in Gaza. They were the first to be bombed. So I will put that link also for you in the chat.
Thank you.
I think it's time for us to kind of say any closing words. I know in our questions I said, what's the spiritual core of this for you? What brings you home? And I wanted to bring to that, and also any reflecting words that either of you have about how people can take this moving forward. What's the most, how do we engage? So I'll drop a couple links in the chat. We have upcoming events for QEW with a person who spent his life work on the intersection of nuclear weapons and disarmament, and also on now just wrote this book on warheads to windmills about the transition to renewable energy. So we have that coming up. We have another with an Indigenous speaker, Tom Kunesh. So we hope to see you in future events. I'll put those links in the chat. And Joyce and Lindsey, final words.
Well, I can just say very my message to all of you is to really not decouple peace building from climate justice issues, and because they are interlinked. And we've seen today, we spoke about many examples of how we see climate change impacting communities. And so I think my hope is that you remain engaged. I know many of you are already leaders and movers and shakers, as you said, Keith. But I hope that you remain engaged, with AFSC and with CUNO and with other Quaker and non-Quaker organizations. I remember when I first got this job, I felt a little like, we are so small compared to the problems of the world, and what can we do? And then I think what really keeps me going is to know that people continue to stand up and people continue to persevere, and every little act counts, whether your act is speaking to your neighbor, or your act is, sending a letter to the editor, or challenging your lawmaker, or going to the street, or being part of research and advocacy. Whatever it is, it's adding up. And we have to believe in the power we have as a collective to continue engaging, to continue showing up. And by you being here, you are saying that we are showing up and we are going to continue being engaged. So I want to thank you for that. And hope that you continue to visit the AFSC website. Support to our different programs, especially our Gaza work is so critical at this time. I hope that you can stay connected with us. Thank you.
So I'm just trying to ask people to Google, because I'm on my husband's laptop and I can't do the German. Google CUNO and the role of decentralized renewable energy in peace building. Spiritually, we often talk about this as a spiritual crisis, and how, as Keith said, peace with Earth and peace on Earth are so interconnected, and cherishing the sacred in all, cherishing the sacred in nature, cherishing the sacred in us and each of us, in our neighbor, loving our neighbor, the teachings of Jesus. How do we love our neighbor as we love ourselves is so profound. And I think I often see it, I know it's scary time, and we're scared because it's scary and it can feel overwhelming. But when you do little steps in your life, it starts to feel less overwhelming because you're a piece of a puzzle. And none of us can do this alone. But when we join together, we can. And what I find so moving is that there's almost a sense of a privilege to be alive at a time when we can be part of a transformation, because it's not going to happen without people trying. It's just not going to. But with people trying, you start to see a shift. And it's at the age of 61, I didn't grow up with anyone talking about colonization or racism or Me Too or sex. It just wasn't discussed. But now we've got Black Lives Matter. We've got the Me Too movement. We've got people talking about colonization, and acknowledging the harm in the room is so powerful to help take responsibility and move forward on what's the world we want our children and our future generations to inherit, of how we live together. So I just wanted to share that, because Quakers have such a profound space in this, and tell the story of regeneration and care.
Thank you, friends. And, thank you, Joyce and Lindsey. Love and courage to you all. And I hope each of you take those small steps into community and into the work. It's been good to be with you all.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith, for organizing, and Mika.
Yes, thank you.
Earth-
Earthcare witness. Thank
Thank
you.
you.